Button. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. I can't believe this is already my second meeting. We've got a full assessment cycle under our belts, and we're raring to go. Raring to go for the next one. So, as you guys know, this is the annual Township Assessors Assembly. I am required by law to convene this meeting near, on, or about January 1st of the given year. Last year it was a little bit later because we had to transition out. Bob wanted to give me the opportunity to get situated and then give my own assembly, so he didn't hold one in January last year. This year we're getting sort of back to the schedule. I apologize for the sudden change in plans. Had a family emergency come up in beginning of January that took all that required me to have my attention taken away for that particular week. So I appreciate you working with us. We're going to get into it. There's going to be some new stuff in here. Some of it's going to be sort of a rehash of what we went over last year and what we sort of go over every year. But there are some new things that I'm going to bring to all y'all's attention for this year. First, to get started like we did last year, we'll go over our transitions. Our friend David retired back on August 31st. We had a nice little party. I know some of you guys came and wished him well, wished him off into the sunset. Who's doing well. But with everybody who leaves, we always have new faces coming in, new folks learning the ropes to say hi to. These are our two new staffers. Josh, we hired in July. He replaced David. He is our new current GIS specialist. He comes to us, as all good folks do, from the state of Indiana. And he's getting situated. He's doing the same sort of things that David did. He's kind of learning the ropes of what we do here. And then we have Tracy here. We hired Tracy in August. Tracy also, like all good folks do, comes to us by way of the state of Indiana. She's a third administrative specialist in the office. We hired her in August. They are fitting in well. We are so pleased to have them. Josh finished his CIAO stuff in, you still got electives to do? He finished his basic courses back last fall. And then Tracy's getting ready to start hers next week. Is when your first one is? Yeah. So we're already hitting the ground running with getting folks going. Sorry. Oh.
Yeah. For those who haven't met me, Sean, Deputy Assessor.
So here's our staff matrix. Connie is Chief Deputy. She handles a lot of the administration and policy stuff we do, the kind of temporal issues downstairs related to, just HR administration, time off, things like that. She's our public access counselor and open records counselor. So if somebody requests any public information or any documents, it's all going to go through Connie. If you guys have any questions with getting, data or any information from DevNet, Connie's the person you're going to want to go through. She also handles liaising, is that the proper term? Liaising with PTAB. When those records come from PTAB, when those PTAB reviews come in, she gets that process initiated. And then she actually does the residential PTAB appeals. She handles doing those. And then she also handles any non-homestead exemptions. So like churches, exempt properties, things of that nature. Then we have Sean. Sean Harner is our deputy assessor. We promoted her up last year to take Kevin's place when Kevin left for the township. She manages relations with you folks, as you guys know. She's going to be your first point of contact. If you have anything assessment related, go to Sean first. She goes through and reviews the books after they've been submitted for any errors, questions, corrections, things like that. She's also going to be taking on special valuation projects. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But any of those special valuations that we do at the county level, she's going to be the main liaison and point of contact for those. And then as necessary, as our workflow ebbs and flows, she'll assist at the counter and on the phones. Josh, we already introduced him. He's doing the the work David did. So any splits and combinations, Josh is putting in to GIS and getting that process started. He's also doing all of the farmland valuations, getting the farmland put into the system. He's learned that process, and he's the one responsible for that. And then mapping stuff. Hopefully, as he gets more and more experience, not that he doesn't have a huge amount of experience already, but as he gets more experience with what we do here and he gets the day-to-day stuff, he's really well trained. He's got a lot of experience with mapping, and I'm going to start putting him on some special mapping projects that I think are going to be really cool for assessment purposes. Like I always say, mapping is the future of this industry, of what we do, and the way that mapping interacts with valuation is the next level in assessment. And I think Josh has got the chops to handle that. So that's a little bit down the line, but that's what he does. Then we have Mary downstairs. She assists with sketching of properties. She's also our main appeals liaison. She does anything and everything related to taxpayer complaints and appeals. It's all going to go through Mary. And she's the staff representative to the Board of Review. So she works with Joe, Gene, and Gina as the Board of Review process sort of gets going. She's responsible for keeping all those ducks in a row. Jill downstairs does transfer declaration review and analysis. When those transfer decks come in, Jill's the one who goes in, makes sure everything's hunky-dory. And then she's also one of the folks who does homestead exemptions. And then Tracy is also doing homestead exemption work, and she does taxpayer counters and telephone support as well. So if you come into the office, Tracy's going to be the first person you see, usually. Always greets you with a smile and helps you get down to the clerk's office or to get your birth certificate or over to City Hall to get what you need there more often than not. Board of Review is here. Gene, Joe, Gina. Got a good team going. Gina is unfortunately not able to be here. She's got some stuff going on, but Joe and Gina are here. The board is going to meet to reorganize on or about May 1st of the given year. Last year, I think you guys had your organizational meeting the day we had. The day it was Farmland Day? Okay. This year it'll be a little bit later, obviously, because we're this far in. But did I screw that up, Joe? Are you PH, Joe? Ah, darn it. I'm sorry. I'll fix that. All right. So that's the staff. That's what we've got going on in that way. Now we'll talk about last year, what happened, how it sort of went. Here's our publication recap from last year. Our first books were submitted on February 16th. Last books were submitted on September 22nd. 24 townships submitted on or before the statutory deadline, which, wonderful. Love it. That was great. And 28 of 31 submitted on or before the prior year's submittal date. So that's kind of the direction that we're going for. Here's our publication recap. You can see how we published out. Unfortunately, I have to publish if your township has a newspaper that is published in that township, physically published, there are a couple different definitions of publication, but if they say their publication situs is in your township, I have to publish your books in that township. So Normal, I have to publish in the Normalite because they're published in Normal. And then Ed Pine has all his papers. Every one of them, a lot of them have different, the Chenoa Town Crier. So I have to publish in the Chenoa Town Crier. So you can see how those map out, kind of color-coded there. Our first publication, those 12 townships in green, we published on July 27th. We published those in the McLean Chronicle. and then you can see, just based on the colors, how those different publication dates were out. I tried my best to coordinate it because it does get expensive to publish. And the most expensive part of publication for the small townships is that preamble, that first part of the publication. You know, you may only have 24 changes that you've submitted in a given year. But we still have to publish that big half-page spread in there, and that can get pretty pricey. So if we can consolidate those, we do whenever possible. It helps us kind of keep those publication costs down. So that's why we had all those in green, you know, those 12 townships all published under one preamble, which saved us a lot of money. And then, so we published in 9 different publications. The last 2 published on October 28th in the Pantograph. So yeah, that was the publication year. Hope I can streamline it more, but right now I think we're pretty maxed out on the most efficient way we can do it in terms of the number of papers we got to print in. A new thing we introduced this year. When I started, my goal was to enhance the public access to what we do, kind of make it a little bit less opaque. Make it a little bit more accessible to folks because, you know, we knew what those multipliers were going to be coming in. We knew we hadn't seen anything quite like it in a long time. So I wanted to give the taxpayer an opportunity to hear firsthand what we do, how we do it, and then what they can do if they disagree with it. So we started our first taxpayer information section. That says 2023. It should be 2022. But we had our first set of taxpayer information sessions this year. We held them in 5 different locations. In Stanford was our first one. We had one out at Lake Bloomington. We had one in Leroy. We had one in Normal, and then we had one right here in this room. The attendance was a little bit across the board. Our first, believe it or not, the most well-attended one we had about 20 folks at the Stanford meeting out there for our very first one. And then we had another probably 12 to 15 at Lake Bloomington, another dozen at Leroy. So it was the smaller townships that really came in and came to the sessions. Then, you know, Normal and Bloomington were a little bit more sparsely populated. I think we had one person at Normal who now is on the county council. So and then we had 1 or 2 folks here at Bloomington. But, you know, the opportunity was presented, and they're actually up on the YouTube channel right now. You can stream the one that we had here in Bloomington, and you can see what we talked about. You know, we talked about stuff like how the property tax assessment process actually works, what we do. We talked about the basics of equalization. We didn't get too in-depth on it, but we explained why we put a 5% factor on the entire township. Why that number is not arbitrary, and why we put it on the entire township. We talked about exemptions and deductions, and we talked about how to properly file an appeal or a complaint. We held the sessions in cooperation with Rebecca McNeil, who was very, very helpful in helping get that idea up off the ground. She came to every one of the and so she was my co-presenter at every one of these. And so then she, after we talked about the assessment side of things, she talked about the tax billing side of things. She explained how extension works and how they send the bills out. And then Kathy Michael came to several and had representatives at our meeting too, and she explained the extension side of the process. Folks also had the opportunity, in some cases, to meet their township assessors and county board members. Justin came to several of the meetings. Rob came to the one in Normal. Kent, were you there, or was it just Rob? It was just Rob? Okay. Steve came to the one in Bloomington. And so those were that was very much appreciated. And then Catherine Metzger, who's the county council member from up in Carlock, that area in west northwest part of it. She came to she's the chair of the finance committee. She came to every one of the information sessions, which was a real treat for folks to see. It was very much appreciated from us. And then as well, Lizzie Johnston from Normal came to the Normal meeting, and Cassie Taylor, who's our wonderful county administrator, came to the meeting here in Bloomington. So we had a really good presence from the executive side of the county, and in addition to the township assessors. I think it was really wonderful. And I'm looking forward to doing it again this year. We're going to take what we learned this year in terms of locations, what people wanted, where they came from. Probably won't have 5 sessions this year. Hopefully, part of the issue too was the timing. You know, some of the sessions we did our first session, I think in July, when the notices in Stanford went out. And then our last meeting was beginning of October. Hopefully this year we'll be able to condense that down a little bit so it's a more compressed schedule. But we learned a lot, and we're excited to do it again. Do a quick wash of the board of review from this year. We held our last meeting and adjourned on the 29th of December. Processed 625 dockets in 2022, and 452 of them were taxpayer complaints. This is very similar to what we had in the prior year. Slightly less, ever so slightly less than what happened in 2021, which was surprising. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought with the multipliers that we put on, I thought we were going to have a lot more taxpayers file an appeal. And so I was shocked when those numbers came in and we didn't have the kind of crush that we had. Again, we don't know what's going to happen next year. I mean, these multipliers are not going to slow down for the foreseeable future. So as the market kind of makes the changes that we all expect it to make, we'll see if those appeal numbers change. But for right now, you know, folks seem pretty, I don't want to say content, but they accept that our values are pretty reflective of what they would expect. Our loss in 2022 was approximately $20.5 million, which is generally in line with what we've had every year. $18 to $22 million a year is what we expect to lose at the Board of Review. It's right at that 1% to 2% level that you generate, and that's not just here in McLean County or in Illinois. That's a national sort of rule of thumb, is you can expect to lose 1% to 2% of your value through the appeals process. And so it's right in line with that. And that means we're doing our job, but we're also, we're also open to what the public has to say. Here's our exemptions matrix for the prior year. You can see we had more homestead exemptions for seniors come on. Our general homestead exemption increased slightly. Senior freeze actually dropped slightly. I don't know if that's because of, I'm not going to speculate as to why the numbers of the senior freezes reduced year over year. But it could have just something to do with general income changes. The base of the economy could have caused that. And you can see the rest of them right on down the line. Again, one thing we always say and we encourage, if you have taxpayers who are eligible, you talk to them about anything. If you talk to them about their tax bill, encourage them to look into all the exemptions that they qualify for, especially senior citizens. Have them look into that senior freeze, especially veterans. If you know someone's a veteran, talk to them about, Illinois has some very, very generous property tax benefits for our veterans. And they should, by all means, if they can, avail themselves of those benefits. They've earned them. They're in law. They expect you to use them. They want you to use them. So if you qualify for them, go get them. We had some changes to the senior freeze process. We changed the name by law, the statute. Folks down in Springfield got together and said, we need to change the name of this exemption. And we need to, not only do we need to change the name, we need to require that the counties put this name change on all of their forms and all of their documentation. So the senior freeze is now called the Low Income Senior Citizens Assessment Freeze Homestead Exemption. Like always, These forms will be mailed out near the end of January to all seniors with previous exemptions. So if they've already getting the senior freeze or the senior citizen exemption, we're going to mail them that application. Another change they've made is how you can qualify for the senior freeze, what sort of documentation you can use. Now you can submit all the documentation that you see up there on that third bullet point. Any one of those things can be used to show that you qualify for the senior exemption. Just making the process a little bit easier for seniors to manage. Back in 2020, they changed the statute so we don't have to notarize those forms anymore, which is nice. Steve, you probably noticed you don't have as many people coming in and having. Is Josh a notary? Can Josh notarize? Cindy did. Cindy was a notary, and so she would always have folks coming in getting their senior freezes notarized. But we don't have to do that anymore, which is nice. We'll have those new forms added to our website here in the coming days, so you can get those out to folks. Here's a look at 2022, just as a overall summary, how things changed year over year. You can see the bottom line numbers. We have our border review changes. We already talked about that, $20 million. Year over year change, we arrived at 289, almost $290 million in changes, which worked out to about a 6.3% increase countywide year over year. That is inclusive of any of the work you guys did in factoring, any county factors or any township factors that we put on at the county level, any new construction that came on. That number is inclusive of all of that. So 6.3% is how much our tax base grew in McLean County year over year. Again, we don't know what the future holds, but if it's anything like we're seeing, like we saw last year, which we think it will be, we're looking at sort of the same thing next year. Moving forward in 2023, farmland. Josh is going to be calculating the farmland early next week for 2023. So those values that the Farmland Assessment Committee approved last year for the tax assessment year that we're now in, those values will be applied next week. We are expecting the 2024 values in the next few months. So when we get those values from the state, I will convene the FARC, Farmland Assessment Review Committee, and we'll go from there. They'll have their chance to take a look at what these new values are going to be. And they're technically required to approve them. I've never seen our FARC actually reject the farmland values. We've talked about it a couple times, have we not, Gene? Yes. Yeah. The problem is, if you reject what the FARC says, the state says, all right, what are you going to do about it? You got to give us something. And then usually after that, it's like, okay, maybe you guys have a point. These will do. And then after they've approved those values, there's a hearing and they give notice and all that. It's pretty pro forma at this point. I don't know a lot about the farmland assessment process, but I do know that there are a lot of dedicated folks whose entire career, their entire professional life is dedicated to getting these values out every year. So I have a great deal of respect for what they do. And I know they don't come at what their values are lightly. So now we have the quad for 2023. We saw for the first time in a lot of years low ratios throughout the county. For a long time, things had sort of held water, maintained. The pandemic-related real estate boom really turned all that on its ear. So we started seeing some real changes in the way assessed values were coming in. This most recent year, as you guys know, we saw equalization factors averaging about 5%. Some townships got as high as 9%. Who was it who got 9%? White Oak Township got a 9% multiplier. Towanda Township got about a 7.5, 7.25, 7.5% multiplier. Chinoa got a 1. Or I got pretty close to it. Who was it got a 1? Bellflower. Cheney's Grove. Cheney's Grove got a 1. Some of those townships out there, they had more like 2%. City got a 2.5%, a little bit over 2.5%. So yeah, I mean, all that goes to show is this market was really, really dynamic, and that's the thing about it. No matter how hard you work, I know how hard City works to keep their multipliers, to keep their values in check, because I worked with them for years doing it. I know what they do to try to keep up with that. It is a full-time job. And even that, they couldn't quite, and that's not their fault. This market that we have been in has been so dynamic and so fast that it's almost impossible to keep up with on that level without having to do some kind of multiplier. Sales prices are now, looks like they're starting to trend back down a little bit. Ratios are starting to maybe trend back down a little bit. Marketing time is increasing because financing is getting more and more challenging. Interest rates are high as they've been in a long time. That has certainly cooled down some of the market activity that we've seen. But our ratios are still very, very low. Last time I ran the median ratio in the county, I think it was in the 26s, which is, that is low. So that's the numbers we're working off of for equalization this year. So you can expect something very, very similar in terms of equalization this year, unless you do substantial changes during the quad. And that's where we are now. Equalization is generally sufficient to kind of keep stuff in line in off years, but we're in the quad. When we are in the quad, we need, as township assessors, as the assessment official in each township, we need to make sure that we are reflective of market value as possible. So, Bob always said, pay attention to detail. It's a cliche, garbage in, garbage out. We can only do so much if the data is not good, we're only going to be able to do so much. More accurate details lead to more accurate values, which lead to lower CODs. And COD is the most important thing. COD is the most important thing that we look at. It's even more important than the median ratio. We can fix a bad median. You can't fix a bad COD without doing some serious on-the-ground type of work. And that all starts at the beginning of the process, getting your initial characteristics right. You guys are out there in the field. You see what's going on. The better information you get us, the better our sketches can be, the better information we can have in the record. We can have better data. Again, as it relates to sketches, for those of you who don't sketch on your own, physical sketches are the best. If you can get out there with a tape measure and measure the property, that's the best. If you are going to submit us blueprints, which, obviously we understand if that's what you have to do, that's fine. Make sure that the print matches the actual physical structure. Sometimes there can be changes from when that print is initially submitted to you or to the zoning department. They can those buildings can change sometimes pretty significantly between what that submitted print was and what was actually there. So if you're going to submit us the prints, at least go back out and make sure that we're matching what you see on the ground matches up with what's on the piece of paper. And there are some buildings, you're not going to be able to measure it on your own. Big commercial buildings, you have a 200,000 square foot warehouse, you're not going to get the tape measure out on that thing. I understand that. But just do what you can to make sure everything is verified. Make sure you get all the pertinent details in too, not just length and width. Building height, how high is the building? That can impact the value. How the building is sort of laid out, set on the lot. All of those things are things that we need, that we like to have in our record. so that we can maintain the best information possible. Now we're going to talk about equity. I respect what you guys do. I respect your autonomy as appointed, elected, or hired officials. It's your guys, this is what you guys do. I am 100% respectful of that. So I leave most decisions to you folks. There are a couple things, though, that we likely are going to need to step in to correct because equity is that important. And there are some property types that do cross township lines, and they exist in market areas that need a county-wide focus and need a county-wide approach. So beginning in 2023, there are going to be classes of property, certain types of property that we're going to equalize at our level to make sure that everybody's on the same sheet. You know, apartment buildings don't need to be equalized at the county level. That market area is geographically specific enough that you guys have the data to handle it. Some things, though, it gets a little bit more challenging. The biggest example would be mobile home real estate. Mobile home parks exist all over. They exist all over the county. They are also in the city and the township. And if you have mobile home parks that are, you know, we have some mobile home parks that are split between, the park itself is split between assessment jurisdictions. It's almost impossible for us to not take a countywide approach on valuing those and still maintain equity. Our values in most of the county are still pretty low relative to market, and one of the main reasons for that is we've always had that focus of, you know, yeah, we know the market value is low. At least when I was in Bloomington, my focus was, hey, I know these values aren't as high as they could be, but at the same time, didn't want to have the problem of my park is on at 10 times the value that Kent's parks are on at. That creates an equity issue across the county. In order to address that, we're going to value those, just the land. Any improvements are out there, we're still going to leave to you guys, but we're going to try to equalize the land portion of it ourselves. Same's going to go for grain elevators and cell towers. We're going to put those values on at the county level to make sure that we have an equalized, equity-based county value. Like I always say, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was when I was early on from one of the field, when I worked for the state, one of the old-time field reps told me, I don't care what you do, as long as you do the same thing to everybody. And with these types of properties, I think that is the most important thing, that we are doing the same thing to all of those properties. Sean has volunteered to take this thing on, take this project on. So give her the help she needs. She's very thorough. She's very organized. She's going to do a great job. And she'll be available to you to help out. So yeah, give her the assistance she needs. Deadlines. I know this is a quad, so you got a little bit more of an expanded workload. June 15th is the statutory deadline for the submission of books. I would like us to be submitted as much as possible by June 15th. Most all of you were